For many who look back at the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, they don't necessarily recall it as being a scary movie, despite the game's creator, Scott Cawthon, setting up horror as one of the main aspects when going into the early development of the script in 2018. In spite of this, the film had its own fair share of gruesome scenes. Well, what I'm here to discuss is in regards to the teasers leading up to the actual film's theatrical release, because a week prior to the movie's launch on October 27th of 2023, Universal released an interesting video onto their YouTube page, and included in this video was a bunch of security monitors, displaying some interesting VHS footage. But first, I believe it's necessary to understand how we got here in the first place, because on the same day, Scott Cawthon created a Reddit post with an intriguing title of Five Nights at Freddy's The Movie The Game, where Scott goes on to state how a new game has been in the works for quite some time. It is being fully released to the public in celebration of the movie, where he then drops a link down below. But going onto this page and downloading the game, you're greeted with an unexpected familiar face.
I'm scared. Run anyway. No way!
Yep, that's right. Classic Scott and his troll game. Because as it turns out, the FNAF movie game was all a facade for the true game hiding beneath. Freddy in Space 3. While playing through this game and after beating the final boss, unlocks a YouTube URL link, which, when put into the browser, sends the viewer to an unlisted video which can only be obtained by completing the game. But it's what's in this video that has piqued my interest on the topic of missing FNAF movie content. Because if aligned correctly, most of the scenes that are shown in these VHS security tapes match up perfectly with the movie's theatrically released scenes. So I'll be going over every lost VHS scene that was originally planned for the movie's final cut that has sadly been lost to time. But first, instead of starting at the beginning, I'd like to take us a little forward into the video, because there's an interesting scene that I'd love to discuss that I believe would have some serious impacts on the movie's lore. As many of you recall, there was a scene in the film with Mike sleeping in his chair on the second night, where the building's electricity began to flicker, which revealed an "It's me" text on the mirror. Well, according to an early screening of the FNAF movie that was leaked months before the movie ever released, there would have been a scene on the same exact night on night 2, where Mike would have rummaged through the office before going to sleep. He then would have found a stack of VHS tapes on one of the shelves in the office. Now, with curiosity, Mike ended up playing every tape, which revealed different sections of a news report covering the missing children's incident. Now, hearing this, most of you know exactly why I'm bringing this up in the first place, but for the small amount of you who haven't watched the security footage video from Universal, there was a section in the video at exactly 6:28 which revealed a news reporter speaking on the incident. Honestly, I think keeping the scene in the final cut of the film with Mike finding this news report would have built the overall story of the FNAF universe nicely. I also think that keeping this next version of a particular scene in the film would have benefited the film's story, because the movie had a notable narrative in regards to the dream sequence that appear in the film. In most of these segments involving Mike's lucid dreamlike state, some keen-eyed viewers would have noticed a recurring pattern in each dream that Mike was having. During these scenes, we can see that Mike is still his adult-like self, when most, if not all, these sequences are taking place years prior, to when Mike should have been just a kid. Now, it would have made more sense if these parts of the movie were portrayed with a younger version of Mike, which would have gave the viewer some sense of understanding on when this was taking place. And that's exactly what the scene would have been, according to another part of the security footage tape. Because earlier into the video, you could spot a monitor which quickly flickered a scene with a young actor for Mike that was removed from the film. Well, the reasoning for him being removed is unknown. However, we do see him appear slightly running in the forest where his brother was taken. And even in the small flicker of footage we got, we can hear him screaming for Garrett's name. As for when the scene would have been placed in the film, we're not really sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was during the first night. Well, as for this next scene, we know exactly when and where it was taking place, because we have multiple shots and context in reference to the scene with Hank vandalizing the pizzeria and his unexpected death to Bonnie. If you watched my last video covering the lost footage of the movie, Hank's death would have been a bit different compared to what was released in the film, where instead, he would have been attacked by Bonnie and Chica in the kitchen scene with his son Carl. Well, according to this part in the VHS footage, instead of this scene happening, we instead would have got a slightly prolonged scene that we got in the finished film where Hank smashes up the pizzeria. In the clip, we can see him sliding his baseball bat in the archway before slamming into some poster hung up on the wall, causing glass shards to shatter and spread across the floor. Now skip a few minutes ahead, and we can then see Hank running down the same hallway that he ran down in the movie, but with a different angle and perspective. Now here's where things begin to change drastic, because at 4:50 into the video, we can see in the top left VCR monitor that Hank was pushed and pinned against the door by Bonnie before his death. And thanks to the early screening of the movie, we could get a little bit more context as to what happened to Hank in the janitor's closet. As Hank turned on the light, Bonnie would have stepped closer to Hank, but not before grabbing him by the neck and shoving him against the door, where he then dragged him upward with his strength, choking and pinning him against the door's window, exactly like we see in the VHS tape. However, it's unclear as to how exactly Bonnie unalived him, but many have speculated he used his guitar to stab Hank, the same way he did in the cut version of Hank's alternative death scene in the kitchen. But if you want more context on that, you can click here and watch the video. But honestly, I think they should have kept this version of the scene as part of the movie, as it would have helped with boosting the intensity of the scene. But I think it was cut to fit the PG-13 rating that the film was aiming for after the R cut was scrapped. And speaking of cut content, there may have been some extra scenes involving a mysterious character that many of you are familiar with, because a little towards the middle of the VHS tapes being played, on the right hand side, we can see the guard trying to unscrew the vent in a plan to escape from the animatronic. But if you keep watching, there's a quick flash of a peculiar animatronic that many may recognize as Shadow Freddy. Well, if you're unfamiliar with the Shadow animatronic, he made his first appearance years ago back in 2015 with FNAF 2's initial release, where he can be spotted in the parts and service area as a small little Easter egg appearance. And this is exactly how he's shown in this footage, with just a quick little flicker of him being shown. We also get to see him as a slight plot point in one of the scenes, because when Mike escapes the torture Freddy chair, he ends up crawling on the ground and backing up into one of the suits which has the vandalizer stuffed inside. This includes Matt, which was Abby's babysitter, and she ended up being stuffed into the Shadow Freddy suit. Now the reason I bring this up is due to an interesting detail which was being shown during the quick flicker of Shadow Freddy in the monitor, because if you go frame by frame, you can clearly see that the animatronic is activating and coming to life, as the eyes have a slow fade from being offline to activated. Well, this could mean that there may have been some scenes planned with Shadow Freddy in the movie, maybe giving him more of a lore importance into the story. But even if this isn't true, I do have high hopes for him to return in the sequel film next year. I also believe this next clip from the security footage we're going to go over was originally planned for the film, but for some reason was removed from the finished version of the movie. Now, during one of the scenes in the film, towards the end of the movie, as Mike and Vanessa are discussing their plans to take down William, Abby ends up interacting with the animatronics on stage, where Chica then begins to lead her to the back room, where we get another look at one of the springlock suits that were spotted earlier in the movie, but this time the springlocks are primed and ready. Now, the reason I bring this information into thought is that since this security VHS tape footage was released, many people have viewed it for themselves and reacted to it on release day, and have pointed out a particular part in their reactions.
Chica Jess, hanging out with Chica. So it shows that Abby and the animatronics get along okay.
Other individuals have also mentioned how it looks to be that Chica is somewhat trying to protect Abby. Now, we're uncertain as to why this would be the case, as we clearly see Abby being friendly with the animatronics during the entire movie. But it is quite possible that there was a scene originally filmed and set to appear in the movie that featured Abby being guarded by Chica. Perhaps at some point the animatronics had an argument over what they should do with Abby, and that's why Chica was so reluctant to hand her over. I'm also certain that this scene would have most likely taken place in the previous night, just before Abby gets taken back to the safe room, as it would make the most logical sense from a timeline perspective. Or maybe it wasn't anything at all. We'll never truly know. But for this next VHS tape, I'm sure we have the most clear-cut evidence as to when and where this would be taking place. And that's due to the fact that at the very end of the VHS tapes coming to an end, as the camera begins to zoom into the hallway that Springtrap is hiding at, in the very top left corner, we get a close look at Foxy. But not just any Foxy, because if you look closely, you can see that the lower side of his stomach patch is fully fixed and not damaged at all. Now, this is very weird considering that Foxy is made up of a bunch of torn parts, including ripped fabric. But we can actually explain this away very easily by simply looking over all the scrapped and unreleased content from the movie that was leaked from the set of the filming for the movie many months ago back in 2023. Firstly, we'll start out by reviewing a video that was posted by one of the staff members on set for the filming last year, which showed off the animatronic actors dancing inside of the suit, and not for any particular scene, as it was described later that they did this just for the fun of it. Now, all fun aside, if we zoom in on the far left, we can actually see a blurry shot of the suit. Now, if you look closely towards his leg, they seem a bit like they're covered in fur, and we can actually get a closer look thanks to these images that were released around the similar time of this behind the scenes video, posted by the actress who played young Vanessa. We can see her posing next to all the fixed versions of the animatronic character. This includes fixed Foxy, which you can clearly tell has furry legs, similar to the fabric that is used to make the Muppet. Thanks to the animatronics being worked on by Jim Henson's Creature Shop, we then got some similar photos of this fixed Foxy variant with some images being released months ago, with Abby and Mike standing next to this version of Foxy. Now, how and why they're posing with this fixed version of Foxy, I have no clue, but it's possible that a scene was planned with him at some point in the movie. And that leads me to my next point, which is that I'm very certain I know exactly what scene he would have been displayed at, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there was a part in the VHS tapes that Mike found that displayed a news reporter going over the missing children at a birthday party event. Now, this birthday party event is supposedly of the missing children's incident, the main part of the FNAF story that ties it all together. And thanks to some information we got from someone who viewed the early screenplay of the film before its release, we could piece together a complete narrative as to when and where this Foxy variant was shown off. At some point in the early version of the script, there would have been a scene with Vanessa having flashbacks to her witnessing the incident, where she stares deep into the dark hallway, hearing the voices of screaming children begging for someone to help them. It's even described in great detail that we actually see William stabbing and slashing outward with his knife, revealing the upper part of his forearms and hands, revealing that William is the one committing these acts. Now, it's to my belief that this scene would have shown off the animatronics for a brief moment on their stages, which explains why they are all nice and polished, since this was set in the 80s. And that's what I think this small snippet of VHS footage is referencing. But hey, who knows? Maybe we'll just have to wait until the making of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie book releases this August. Wait, oh?